Hello and welcome to the Power of the Truth podcast. Today I'm interviewing a very, very lovely lady called Christine Dillard. Christine has written a book called The Truth She Showed Me, and it's all about her escape from a relationship that involved coercive control. I think we all assume that if the worst happened in our relationship, we would be able to get out and pack a bag and leave. But Christine's story is testament to the fact that it's not that easy. And in some respects, I think that's a relief for us all to hear, because the assumption is that it's just simple and we all just do what we know is the right thing, especially when there's children involved. But there's always so many more factors to take into consideration than that. And the reality of actually doing it is far different to thinking you know what you would do in that scenario. Christine's work is really important, and she's using what she's been through to help other people, and it's a very interesting conversation for men and women. If you are affected by anything you hear in this episode or you want to reach out to her, please do. There will be links in the show notes for anybody who's affected by what they hear in this episode, so please approach with caution if you do feel it might be a trigger. So please approach with caution if you do feel it might be a trigger. Without further ado, enjoy this episode with Christine Dillard. Okay, welcome to the Power of the Truth. Christine, thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Fran. Thank you.
So, for the benefit of my lovely listeners, could you please tell us who you are?
I am the mother of two. I live in South Dakota. I am the author of The Truth She Showed Me, and it's a story about my 17-year marriage and the process of discovering myself again after 17 years of coercive control, and working through the motions of healing and the exit, and just kind of the roadmap that I took and the path that I took, things that I should have seen that maybe I didn't. But I'm super excited to kind of share insight in the story here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's the kind of story that I think back in the day, people didn't talk about their experiences in these kind of relationships, because it was very much the put up and shut up generation, wasn't it?
Yes.
And so now we've come into this new era of people actually going, I'm not okay with this. This balance is not okay. And I'm really keen to shed as much light on this. I think from our call that we had, so much of what you spoke to me about I could relate to in terms of friends' relationships and things that they've gone through and divorces. So the more we talk about it, obviously, hopefully it'll give more women and men, if they're in the same situation, the courage to get out of these unhealthy relationships. So let's talk about the book. So the book is called The Truth She Showed Me, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes.
And you said the book starts with things that you see clearly now, but back then you didn't see at the time. And even so far as going back to your first date, I know you said. So can you just take us back a little bit to the beginning of your relationship and those moments?
Yeah. I think what I realized as I was working through my healing process is that there were maybe some things that I needed to work through myself, and some things I needed to know that you just don't know at 23. And I met him when I was 23. I was pregnant at the time. He was about 9 years older than I was. In our first date, there are things that, for example, he was 3 hours late with no real apology. A brief explanation of, work kept him and that's why he was late, but not, I mean, being 3 hours late, you would expect a normal person to have some sort of maybe regret or sincerity, like when they show up to apologize for wasting that 3 hours of your life. And on the other side of that, you would think that a person on the other side would be like, oh, this is not a good idea. If he was 3 hours late, I didn't get an apology. Like, what are we doing? Why am I still going on this date? And there's just there was a lack of clarity and understanding, I think, at that point in my life. I shouldn't have gone on that first date. Looking back, I remember it not feeling great, obviously, because he was 3 hours late. But now I look back and I'm just like, man, 1 hour late without an apology or an explanation. I'd be shocked if it ever went on that date. I guess for me, there's these little things that were data points that I should have been paying attention to that I explained away. He blamed it on work. I was career oriented, so I let that math for me. And so I accepted it for what it was. But then you fast forward to date number 2, he was late again. Wasn't 3 hours this time, but also there was still no real apology or regret on his side for being late again. And one time, okay, maybe 2 times, we shouldn't be doing this. We shouldn't have done first time. But anyway, just working through those emotions of seeing some of that stuff now and knowing that through that healing process, my self-worth changed significantly and love meant something different. And what I'm looking for, it meant something different. And I just, at 23, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, you're very young, aren't you? I was 19 when I met my husband, and yeah, I'm not even slightly the same person.
Right. Yeah. Totally different.
So, do you mind telling me how you met? Like, were you introduced to him through a friend, or?
We met at work. So I did temporary staffing at the time, and he worked at a company where we did staffing for them. And we met because I'd been on site multiple times, and we met at their open house. It took about 6-ish, maybe 8 months before we went on our first date, though. There was a delay there. And over time, there were people, I think, even that I worked with that were like, I don't know if this is a good idea. And then, like his boss told him one day, she's really great for you. She keeps your temper in check. And he came home and told me that. And I thought at the time I was like, oh, I'm doing good for him. And I was someone who needed to do good for people and needed to be there for people and needed to feel needed. Right. And that's where my self-worth was grounded. And so like something like that was a compliment at the time. If I heard that same thing today, it would be a totally different experience.
That's so interesting, isn't it? That you took that as a positive from him.
Right.
And he knew he was feeding what you needed in that moment. Maybe not consciously, but,
Right.
We're all, well, I'm definitely a recovering people pleaser. There's no doubt.
Well, me too.
And I think in that moment, obviously, you were like, oh, that's good. I'm doing a good thing. But
Yeah.
that should have been a red flag. The fact that his boss even said he had a temper.
Right. Yes. You bring up a really good point. Like the people pleasing component of this is, you need to feel wanted. You need to feel helpful. And when you focus all your time on that, every time someone gives you a nugget like that, you just latch on because you're like, oh, I'm doing really great things here and I can fix this person or I can help this person. And I think the reality is you learn over time that there needs to be some accountability and fixing of their own.
Yeah. And actually, my next question is, you were 23 when you met him. Looking back at 42, what do you understand about yourself now at that age that you didn't then? And you've mentioned, obviously, your self-worth. So do you think that was really the main thing that kind of allowed you to put up with his behavior? Was that
I think so. I also think that there is, as a society, when we were growing up, at least, that was a few years ago, there was this picture painted of you work through these very specific steps in life. You graduate high school, you go to college, you get married, you have kids. It was very structured, right? And everybody kind of had the same vision. And there was the Disney happily ever after type messaging the entire time we're growing up, right? And in our generation, there weren't a significant number of divorces, at least not in the area I was at, in Iowa. And when people did get divorced, there was this big stigma. Single parents, there was a stigma. The divorce, there was a stigma. So there were all of these things that kind of built up to maintaining an image. And now with the access we have to information through social media, through all of these different channels that we didn't have back then, I think we can see very clearly like what, one, that we're not alone, and two, what it should look like, and then be able to compare that a little bit. Is that what I'm experiencing? Is that what I should be experiencing? So the 40-year-old me and the 20-year-old me, the biggest difference is I think I was looking for love in another person. And at 20 and at 40, I'm looking for that love here. And if I can't have it here, then I can't have it out there. So that's probably been the biggest shift in my thought process, I guess.
Yeah. I think as you get older, you do just get more selfish, but in the right way.
Yeah.
And I always tell my nieces, you learn to say no in your 30s. You say yes to everything in your 20s. You learn to say no
in your 30s. And by the time you get to your 40s and then on to your 50s, you really don't care anymore. You will do what you want to do in that moment because you know that's how it works. And that's how most people operate. But it's difficult when you're young. I even had this conversation with my niece last night. She was like, I don't know what to do about this. And I was like, what do you want? What is it that you want? And she really struggled to express that, you know?
Yeah.
And I think you brought up another really important point, that the stigma attached to things like babies out of wedlock, divorce, all of that for our generation, for Gen X, it's really tough. I remember falling pregnant with my first son, and my husband and I weren't married at that point. We'd been together 6 years, and our families, they weren't entirely happy about the situation, because it is, well, I've got to go and to tell Mrs. So-and-so that my daughter's pregnant and she's not married. The stigma attached to that.
Yeah.
And so, like you say, we maybe put up with things or had to deal with things in a slightly different way and manage that.
Yeah.
in
Manage
order-
that perception.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's, oh dear, what will the neighbours say? Or what will I tell everybody at church? Or what will, all of that. Different, right?
Yeah.
Time to change.
It absolutely is.
Thank
And what's
goodness.
so funny is you realize in your 40s, the neighbors do not care. I still remember even like in my late 30s as I was working this process, I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't even have to answer any questions. I don't have to talk about these things. I want the neighbors to know, and they don't care. They're not going to ask. They don't want to be in the middle of this.
And actually, they've all got their own skeletons in the closet anyway.
Right. Exactly.
Everybody's got stuff going on, right? So, take me back to that relationship. So obviously, I do have a couple of questions. First of all, you waited for the 3 hours. What
I
did you
did.
do? Like, were you just checking your watch, getting another glass of water?
Yeah. Eating an apple, just hanging out,
Bless
just
you.
waiting around. And I didn't tell anybody, which was, I mean, when you think about the things that you do now, you recognize that it had already started. I didn't tell anybody he was late until much later. It was, and then it kind of became like a little bit of a joke between us. It's how it framed up throughout the marriage. But yeah, I didn't tell anybody he was late. I definitely didn't know he was 3 hours late. And because it was embarrassing. And I knew then, like, I remember thinking that I'm like, I'm not telling anybody he was late, and then I waited for him. Like, how pathetic is that? It was ridiculous.
Because it felt like a reflection on you that he didn't have enough
Yeah.
respect for you to turn up on time. So
Yes.
yeah, it's so interesting. And so obviously then you progressed to the second date. He was late again. And then how did things progress then? What happened next?
So many things. Listeners are gonna be like, oh, you didn't see this? How did you not see this? We dated for probably 3 or 4 weeks before he just moved in one day and never he came over and stayed the night and I never left ever. And I had my own house. Like, I was building this life very intentionally, and he came one day and never really left. And it was just 3 or 4 months later we got married. It was a Vegas wedding that I throughout the book you hear a little bit about the wedding, because it was, again, there are things that you see very clearly now, and there were a lot of signs the universe was probably trying to send me. But the place that we got married in Vegas was a Schitt's Creek Bates Motel type place, and we got married at 9:00 at night. It was in a parking lot. It was just the most bizarre thing. And when you think about the way we grew up and the way that women or girls envision their wedding day and things like that, it was none of those things. It was, in fact, the exact opposite of all of those things. So I don't know. There were a lot of things.
So what made you in that moment? Because you were pregnant. You said you were pregnant when you met
Yes.
him, right?
Yeah.
So do you think that it was just, thank goodness he wants me and I'm pregnant? Did it feel like that do you think that's why you went along with it?
I do. And in fact, he had been asking me out. So we had met about 8 months before we started dating. And he had been asking me out almost weekly. And he says I never told him no, but I also never said yes. But I was finishing my master's. I was busy. I was working full time. And then obviously I was also pregnant. And I remember in February when he had asked me out right from my first date, I remember saying to him, because I was mentally, I was like, if I tell him this, he'll stop asking me out. And so I was like, you don't want this. And he's like, well, why not? And I'm like, because I'm pregnant. Just go away. And that was when he was like, I don't care. Like, what are you doing on Friday? And then it dawned, because obviously that's where my headspace was. Nobody's going to want a pregnant woman who's got somebody else's child, right? And then when he said, well, what are you doing Friday night? I was like, well, what do I have to lose? Who else is going to want to take me on a date at 2 months pregnant, and then 8 months, whatever. So we got married. My son was supposed to be born in October. He was early, but I had been having complications. So I think that accelerated things on our timeline a little bit. I didn't want to have a different last name than my son. And my ex was adamant that he signed a birth certificate again. There are things that you see now where it's like that permanently maintains that connection forever, right? He's literally embedding himself in the life I built. And I didn't see it for the reason it was. It seemed like it was a sweet gesture or romantic it seemed like it was intentional for good reasons. And I don't know if it was.
Mm. But that's the love bombing bit, isn't it, of the
Mm.
narcissistic personality disorder. And that is
The hero.
that, yeah, absolutely. The first stage of swooping in and being able to save you in that moment and give you what he knew you wanted, which was that security. And yeah, and I can see how you would be. Anyone would in that scenario be like, oh, thank goodness, this is my knight in shining armor. He's come to rescue me from this situation, and I think, especially like you say, when you're young and your self-worth isn't quite where it is when you're older, and I can just totally see how that would manifest for you.
Yeah.
So you got married, you had your Vegas wedding, and then when did the cracks start to show? What happened? How long did that part of it last where he was still being nice to you?
It was short-lived. Well, and like all these relationships, right? We get stuck because there's these loops or cycles where, they're good to you for a minute or a few minutes and then all of a sudden they're not. And what I found within that first year, it was somewhere in that 6 to 9 month time frame from when we started dating where we had gotten in an argument of some sort and we're newlyweds. I've never been married before. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to handle this. So I call my mom looking for some advice and I get advice for whatever it is. And we have dinner with my parents a few weeks later, my parents and my grandma. And it comes up at dinner that I have called my mom and after my mom makes a comment and not malicious at all, but she makes a comment about it. And like I could feel in the restaurant, like everything changed. And I had no idea what that was at the time. The whole environment just changed. And I remember like, okay, like, what did I just miss? What just happened? And as we were walking to the car that night, he kind of started into he wasn't yelling at this point. There were still people around, but by the time we got in the car, he's screaming at me all the way home and about how I'm embarrassing him and I'm undermining him and I'm making him look like a fool and I never need to involve third parties in our relationship and all of these different. It was like the beginning of the escalation, right? And this escalates throughout the evening. We get home, we get into the house, and we're standing in our bedroom and there was a small little walk-in closet and I had stepped in there to put something in there. And as I'm coming back out, he cornered me in his closet and it's a 2x3 closet. It's tiny. And I'm pregnant and I'm panicking because I'm trapped and he's been screaming for hours. I don't know what's going to happen. So as he steps into the closet, still screaming at me, I push back. He falls, kind of. He like trips backwards over a suitcase that was on the floor and landed on the bed. But I remember in that moment, him standing back up and I remember him like immediately shocked. But then I remember seeing like a light switch flip that turned me into the abuser. And that was in year one. So in that one night, I've become the abuser because I pushed him after being cornered in a closet. After him screaming at me for hours, the isolation was finalized that night. Like I never, from that moment on, never spoke to anybody about my relationship again until after we were divorced. The only two people who even had any inkling that I was doing anything were my lawyer and my therapist. There was absolutely no one who knew anything. And they didn't even know the extent of the things that had happened. They just knew I was just filing for divorce. So yeah, it started very, very early in that first year.
It's terrifying, isn't it? And that just trying to think how to frame my question in that isolation and the way that he used that against you in that moment to ensure that he retained the power, because actually he was terrified, wasn't he, in that moment that you'd spoken to your mum and she perhaps given you some advice which would take away whatever it was that he, was trying to create, this scenario where you were totally beholden to him, which was why. So
Threatened that I might have a support system.
absolutely. And that's usually how it begins, isn't it? That isolation.
Yeah. Yep. And then over the years, it ends up being, he slowly isolates you from friends and family, or he or she, either one, slowly isolate you from friends. You go out for dinner with girlfriends and you get 87 text messages or phone calls. You got to hurry up, come home. There's something wrong with kids. So eventually it becomes too much work to go hang out with friends. So you just quit. Or you come home and he doesn't like who you are after you hang out with that person. So you start making accommodations for all of those things. And eventually there's nothing left. There's no friends left. There's a family left.
Things did escalate, didn't they, over time to more physical abuse? I mean, I don't know how comfortable you are about talking about that, but how long did it take for it to become physical in that sense? And I'm sure he used that abuser status against you, didn't he?
Oh yeah, absolutely. The one thing I don't think we talk about enough is the physical abuse isn't always even just his contact with my body, right? It's all the things that he's throwing around you. It's the stuff flying through the room that could hit you because it's all meant to instill this fear in you. That started immediately. I mean, that was the entire 17 years. There was the throwing of things. There was stuff coming off the wall. There was throwing tools in the garage. It was all of these, every time he got upset about something, a football game, something would go flying across the living room. A lot of times early on, I kept thinking, actually not early on, it carried on throughout, but I kept thinking if he would just hit me. And there was a time where it switched from I wish he'd just hit me too. I pray he would just hit me, because if he left a black eye, people wouldn't question me leaving, because it was a matter of physical safety, right? Because we have this perception that abuse is only in that physical form. And if there's not bruises and there's not broken bones, then it's real. And when it finally did escalate to that point, it was much later. We were talking, it would have been in somewhere between like years 11 and 13. He did hit me and my head hit like a door frame. Again, I was cornered in this confined space. And that seemed to be a pattern. As we learned in all these situations, there's tons of patterns. And that time when he hit me, my head hit the door frame. It was the wood door frame. And I remember thinking, I'm not hurt. And my memory from that point until the next morning is gone. There's like nothing. So one would believe that there was a concussion. But what do? I can't report this. I can't go to the hospital. Like, they can validate there might be a concussion, but what am I going to do with that? There's literally nothing I can do. And the consequences of trying to do something at this point, especially when there's not a broken bone, there's not a bruise that somebody else can validate, right? And I have this missing space, this missing 8-10 hours of space where I don't have any recollection of what happened after. I don't know how I got to bed that night. I didn't fall to the ground. So you can make all kinds of assumptions. I don't know how I got there. But you go through this? Like, who's going to believe this? And then even if they do, let's pretend they do. Nobody asks any questions. They just believe it. It's still his word versus mine. And he has a memory from that night and I don't. So even though you pray for those things, and even when they do happen, it doesn't always happen in a way that actually helps. The other big form of threats that came from him was threats to my life. Always in a confined space. It was always in the vehicle. And it was always a threat to wreck the car with both of us in it. There were 4 of those, I think, over the course of our marriage. And they started pretty early, like in that first 8 years. And then the last one was in the last 6 months we were together. So not only is he threatening his life, but he's also threatening mine. What am I going to do?
How old were the children by that point when he got physical? in that?
What was interesting is they were roughly like probably 10, 6-ish. I might be a little bit off on that, but they're pretty young. And we had come home from dinner with some friends, and the kids were all actually hanging out at our house. Our friends had a son that was our kid's age, and we had come in the house with those friends, and things had kind of started to escalate as the friends were still at the house. So they ended up taking the kids home with them, and the kids left with them. But what's interesting is, and I won't blame the friends because a lot of times it's not safe for you to intervene. So it's not their fault this happened, right? Like this isn't on them. But what's interesting is there were signs. And if it was bad enough that we had to remove my kids from the home, I should have been comfortable enough with those friends to say there was a problem, right? Because that was kind of the first like public witnessing of anything. And it hadn't escalated beyond yelling, but there was enough concern that my kids were removed by them from the house. So yeah, I would, like advice to the friends, like if you ask the question, like, you know what, they might lie about it, they might make up a story, but open the door.
But they know or they know
Right.
you're worried. They know you're
Yes.
concerned. So like you say,
Yeah.
you're opening the door.
Yes. Yeah.
And did he, in those moments when he was threatening to end things in the car, was that, if you leave me, I'm going to do this? Was that always
Every time.
It was the emotional blackmail?
It was that. If it wasn't, it was always the situation where I was trying to leave or threatening divorce. But if it wasn't killing us both, it was taking his own life. And then I had the pressure of, because I hadn't worked up to a point where I was thinking of his actions are his responsibility and not mine. He was threatening to kill himself. And then I have to live with me and divorcing him being the reason my kids don't have a father. And you realize over time, right? Like that, the reality of that is not true. You realize that is not something that you can own. What he's going to do regardless. So sometimes you just have to find peace in that. And that's hard.
I think also the reality is that somebody with narcissistic personality disorder is very unlikely to take their own life. It's always a threat in that respect, because it doesn't fit the profile, does it? They just would. It's always the threat. Yeah, goodness. But he never did it in front of the children.
No, he did not.
I guess.
Yeah.
But
yeah, we were always alone when he did that, thankfully.
Yeah. Well, I guess it would take away his power with them in terms of being the hero for them. If he was being the good guy and always wanting to present the right persona for them, if he showed his true colors in front of them, that would take that away from him, wouldn't it?
Yep.
Yeah. So I know you've said it took 3.5 years for you to finally leave. That involved getting finances in order, waiting until your children were old enough that custody wouldn't be split. Can you walk me through that process? And because I know people think it's really easy to leave, don't they? And it just doesn't work like that, does it?
No. The asking why didn't you just leave? It's actually my favorite question to answer, because I think it sheds light on the complexity behind some of these things, and especially when there's kids involved. It started for me, our financial situation was we were 50-50 basically on household income. And so we had relied entirely on both incomes. And he carried our health insurance. And so there was that. So when things came to a head 3.5 years before I filed, I went through the process of like figuring out what I would need to budget to keep the kids' lives as close to their normal as possible. Keeping them in the same schools, if I could, the same house, knowing that this was going to be a monumental shift. I was trying to keep things as stable as I could, and I'd work through the budgeting. And it felt like for every salary increase I got, because I was committed to really overperforming during that time of work, for every increase I got, it felt like he went backward. I mean, there was like, I saw the hope and the light, and then all of a sudden, starting over again. You live. And there were cycles of that, and that's why it took as long as it did. And there was the bigger piece was the kids, and where I live, once they get into those preteen years, the judges are more likely to consider the child's opinion as long as they're mature enough to give an opinion. And so 12, I was waiting until my daughter became 12, hoping that would be like she'd be old enough, mature enough, that would be a consideration. My oldest would have been 16, so he was definitely old enough. And I mean, honestly, there was, when I would talk about divorce with him, it was never a conversation. It was usually just a threat, to be honest with you. But occasionally when I did, his big thing was, well, I'm not going to live here and watch you move on. And so take what you know about your person, because they're teaching you, they're training you. You know the things. So what we did was we created a parenting plan. My lawyer and I created a parenting plan that basically had no holidays, no nights and weekends guaranteed, no 50-50, because we didn't know where he would live. And my kids were in school and we were trying to keep their lives stable. So it was set up so that it says that I will not interfere with his time with them, which I don't. Whatever time he wants and they want equally, then he can have. But he's not guaranteed anything because he didn't know where he was going to live. He didn't know if it would be in this state or another. So I used that to my advantage in my divorce process and prayed every day that he would sign on it the way it was. Thankfully, he did. And it's created a lot of, like, I have a lot of friends, kind of in the same boat. It created a lot less, I think, tenuous situation with the whole parent. Like, the reality is, like, if you give 50-50, and this is a huge reason why people stay. If I give 50-50, now 50% of the time my kids are with my abuser. And whether he abused them or not, if he can't abuse me, who's he going to abuse? Right? So there was no chance I was going to live with having to put them in that situation every single week or every other week, whatever it ended up being. And had my lawyer at that time advised, like, hey, you need to wait like 2 more years or 3 more years for your daughter to be a little bit older, I would have done that. It wasn't because I was waiting for them to grow up and move out and then it was easier to divorce. It was their safety the whole time.
Do you trust him with them?
No. I would never let either one of them get in a car with him. Luckily, by the time we had divorced, my oldest was driving. So if they went to dinner with him, the kids drove their own car. And I don't.
No. Because like you
I
say,
can't.
that's the worry, isn't it? If you've taken his power away, he hasn't got that power over you anymore. You're not feeding that need for him. So he's got to get it from somewhere, right? I can't even begin to imagine how you navigate that genuinely. And I can imagine how that is a terrifying part of leaving, in the sense that if you do that, then you're putting your children in a situation where they are alone with him. At least when you're there, you can make sure that you're present and you're protecting them, right?
Yes, you can deflect that negative energy. You can deflect the anger or redirect it, I guess, to yourself. And that happens so many times over the years. And I think the reality is we think we shield them from so much. And then we'll learn that we didn't shield them as much as we thought we did. But what other choice did we have? Because if I'd have done it 10 years earlier, I would have been guaranteed 50-50. Like, I wasn't in a spot where I could make the decisions, and I wasn't mature enough to make the decisions I made when I made them, when I finally filed.
And men threaten to take the children, don't they? They say, you'll never
Every
get the
time.
children.
Yeah, we a lot of times say, well, the survivor goes back, an average of 7 times. Well, of course they do, because the minute they threaten the kids, or the minute they threaten to use the kids or to fight for the kids or any of those things, of course I'm going back. Why wouldn't? Of course I'm going back, because the kids are the most important part.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So if you were to say that the most common misconception about leaving an abusive marriage in that way, what do you think what would you say to someone that says, why didn't you just leave? Like, what's the most common thing, do you think?
It is that question for sure, because there's this perception that it is as simple as packing a bag and walking out. We didn't even talk about the systemic issues in that, right? We talked about child support, and we talked about the kids and the visitation and things like that, the financial situation. But we didn't even talk about the fact that we don't even recognize coercive control in a lot of courtrooms. And even when we do, I mean, you have to have a pattern documented. And that's where you start, right? You start documenting the pattern of behavior that fits that coercive control bubble and start documenting. That is the only thing that you'll have working in your favor. If it's something where there wasn't broken bones and bruises, where there were police reports or doctor's reports, that's all you have. And sometimes that's not even enough, right? The system is not built to advocate for, support, or protect survivors in these situations or their children, especially their children. Even a protection order, right? Okay, it's a piece of paper. It's not going to save my life. It might delay him for a minute, or it might accelerate the issues. It might aggravate the whole situation, right? I'm truthfully, I'm fighting that right now. We were a little bit off on timing this morning. I'm dealing with the protection order stuff right now and trying to weigh whether it's a good decision or a bad decision. Is it going to aggravate things? Is it going to make things worse, or is it going to help? I don't know. And I won't know until I do it. There's a lot of risk in that.
Yeah. You think you're protecting your children, but they are seeing, they are hearing, they do know what's going on. But then the abuser is often extremely good at laying on the guilt so thick with the children in terms of them being the victim, that the children unknowingly then become abused in that way because
Manipulation.
then it's manipulation, absolutely, yeah. And I guess then at that point you have to decide, as you just said, how to navigate removing them from their lives completely. I think something that just occurred to me is that if anybody was listening to this that doesn't understand what coercive control is, how would you define that?
I have a really messy explanation, but the short of it is it's all of the pieces that nobody can see. It's the constantly walking on eggshells because you're constantly managing someone else's moods or environment to make sure that their mood is good. It's the gaslighting where you're in an argument and you come in because you have been wronged, and all of a sudden you're apologizing for you don't even know what you walk away so confused because you're like, how did that just happen? It's the financial abuse. In a lot of these scenarios, one person in a household, usually the abuser, carries or has all of the income. And so then in turn limits the income to the other person, or they have to ask permission to use money. And the one thing I would say to that, because I think this is really important, is if you're a stay-at-home parent and the other person is bringing in all of the income, you are also doing a full-time job. The two of you are getting paid by that salary for running a household and for the work that person does, right? Like you are contributing as much, if not more, to the household and the raising of children as that person is bringing in that income to support financially, right? I think people need to feel validated in that because there is a lot of misperceptions around, well, they bring in all the income, so, and I'm not contributing anything. So at the end of the day, I'm not owed anything. I shouldn't get anything, when you think house and the finances through the divorce process. The reality of that is untrue. And it's sometimes a fight, but the reality is it should be a fight. You should fight for those things because you contributed as much as that other person did to making the life work.
100%. I was a stay-at-home mum for a little while when my kids were young. And the fact is that I sacrificed my earning potential because of the decision that we made jointly to have children. And I couldn't have gone back to the job that I had before. That was my main job, my main career, the thing that would have earned me more money. I had to start again several times and have a lower income just to have money of my own. Thankfully, my husband never controlled that. Everything that came in was ours jointly. But I do think it takes women time, certainly took me time, to come to terms with spending what felt like his money.
Mm-hmm.
And he never really made me feel like that. But I felt like that. It felt like Yeah, it felt like I wasn't using my own money to spend because I physically hadn't earned it. And
Right.
and even though all of our money is together, it still is, it always has been. And I probably have more control over it now than he does because I'm admin, you know. But
Yeah.
um it took me a long time to get there. I mean, we've been married 20 years this year. And I probably have only really got to grips with that in the last couple of years, genuinely.
Yeah.
So anyway, outside
Yeah.
conversation is
Yeah.
it's a tough one, but you're right. You have to acknowledge that you are sacrificing your ability to earn to bring up the family that you jointly decided to have.
Yes.
And that it's such an important point. And then you layer that coercive control on top of it, and it just amplifies and compounds all of those feelings of, well, I don't deserve this. I haven't earned this. Yeah, so difficult. But yeah, I mean, essentially, so coercive control is that manipulation, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. Manipulation, it's again, like the walking on eggshells, it's managing mood. It keeps you in such a state that you're a lot of times sleep deprived, and that changes the way you make decisions and the way that you handle your life and who you prioritize and what you prioritize. And because you're managing their mood all the time and their environment to make sure that it stays smooth, you start to lose yourself in that process because you're giving every ounce of energy and every hour to everyone else in the household. And over time, like, there'll be nothing left. You're a shell of a human. The front cover of my book has 2 pictures of me on it, and they're 18 months apart is all. And you can see I age backward 10 years because you can see in my eyes that there is nothing there. And you can see the skin on my face is just not healthy. You can see the visible signs if you look real close.
My next question was, you made a deliberate choice not to pursue shared custody in the traditional sense, and instead you structured things so he would eventually step back. And he did, didn't he, eventually?
He did, yeah. The hope was that because I orchestrated every aspect, every second of our lives, down to literally putting like the school events on the calendar for him, on his work calendar, giving him the buffer for drive time both ways, that kind of thing. It was down to every single detail. And because I orchestrated all of that, I was like praying that if I just quit doing that, what would happen? He's not going to do it himself. I know this. I know he's not going to do this himself. His mom was paying his title and registration for his car before I came into the picture, right? Like, there was a level of responsibility that he never even got at 32 when I met him. So all that to say, I was banking on that, and it was a risk. It worked to my advantage in the first actually, I just did a kind of a review on that first 6 months. And when I looked at that first 6 months, what I found was every single interaction we had with the kids or about the kids, I initiated. Still overperforming, still managing the environment for both of us, but now doing it in 2 houses. And so I remember my therapist saying one day, like, hey, stop it. This is not your job anymore. If he wants to go to the kids' events, he can look them up because he has access and he can go. And if he chooses not to, that's on him. And you can see the literal just complete cliff jump the minute I quit doing that. But it took me 6-ish months before I realized what I was doing. Well, I didn't even realize that the therapist did. So get a support system that's going to check you because you've done it for so long and done it for 18 years, right? By the time that happened.
But also, you're protecting your children in that. You're
That's
protecting your children. You're going, of course, Daddy wants to come and watch
yes.
your recital. Of course, Daddy wants to come and watch your soccer game. Of course, because you're protecting them. You want them to believe that Daddy does love them, right? And
Yes.
that he's not a complete self-absorbed monster who's only interested in himself. So you're then, although you don't want him there, you know the children need that interaction for their validation.
Yes.
So, and I think any good mother would do that scenario because you're not thinking about yourself in that moment. You're thinking about them and what they need and about trying to help them retain some kind of relationship with their father in a way that will give them validation that he loves them, right?
Yeah. And there's, I think, a really important question we have to ask ourselves at that point where it's like, am I helping them by doing this? And I think that's where there's a real fine line, because if I have to orchestrate the presence and create the narrative for every single interaction, am I, and if they don't see the cracks, am I setting them up for success long term? Because at some point the cracks will turn into these divides, right? But if I'm not allowing that to expose itself, their whole life, the day that crashes, I don't know if I'm helping them at that point, because they see the toll on the other parent. They see the person orchestrating. And because you're agitated, you're grumpy, or my kids were famous for saying mad all the time. You're anxious. They know those things. They get old enough to understand what each of those are, and then they start to see them, but they don't know why. And is it fair for them to see that version of you all the time when they get to see this picture perfect presentation of him all the time? Because he doesn't have any of those things. He doesn't have to, because you make it possible for him not to do those things. So I think there's an opportunity for us to be real honest with ourselves about whether or not that's helping or hurting long term.
Was he present when you told them you were leaving?
He was not. There were a lot of concerns about how ugly it could get that evening and how quickly it can escalate. And I had put some things in place. So I had pulled the kids out of school and told them ahead of time before he had gotten home from work. He worked a pretty consistent schedule, so I was fairly safe in doing this. I contacted the school and their teachers to just say, hey, we're doing this. It was a Friday afternoon. So I'm like, over the weekend, we're doing this. So can you just please, if you see something over the next couple of weeks, months, raise your hand, know that there's some things happening at home. And the school and the teachers were super, super great about just taking that information and just leaving it. So I pulled the kids out of school, gave them a heads up. I had a plan for them to go have dinner together, and then they were going to meet up with a friend of mine to hang out until I told them it was okay to come home. And then I had support at the house that was hanging out outside of our house in case things got physical that night. I didn't know. And man, all I can say is when your therapist and your lawyer tell you to do something because they know how it's going to go, just do it. Don't question it. Don't assume you know this person better than they do, because you don't. You know this version of them that you've manufactured, they've manufactured, and you don't even know what the truth is anymore. And there was question, because up to this point, my son did not know that he was not biologically my ex-husband's. And they had asked me over and over again, both therapist and lawyer, if I thought he would tell him that night. Because they're like, if you think he's going to, you need to do this beforehand, because you don't want your son hurt like this. I'm like, there's no way he'd hurt my kid like this. There's just no way. And when I first gave him the papers that night, he was really upset. He was screaming. He threw the papers at me. And he said he's not signing them. And I ended up saying, hey, listen, I've already done that research. You cannot sign them. The judge is still going to sign them for me. So you do your hair. And it escalated enough that eventually I ended up leaving for a while. And I was like, you can work through this and I'll come back when you're calm. And he let me leave that night. And I met the friend that we'd been outside to just decompress for a minute before I went to see the kids. And by the time I got to the kids, he was calling back to back, and he'd been calling the kids back to back, telling them to get home. They needed to get home right now. They knew. I mean, it was a tough spot to put them in, right? Because dad's telling you to get home and he's angry, you can tell. But we had kind of prepared for that and just said, no matter what, you do not go back to the house unless you talk to me first. And in the end, I told him if he would calm down, I would bring the kids back with me. And he agreed to calm down. By the time we got to the house, I left the kids in the car and I went in the house, and he did seem calmer. He was still yelling at me, but I was like, it's probably okay. So he's screaming at me to go get the kids, bring them in. This is ridiculous. I told them without him. He was more upset about that than anything. So I go get the kids and we come in and we're all standing around the kitchen, and he ends up telling the kids he doesn't know where he's going to live, and he doesn't even know he'll be around because mom's divorcing him. And at that point, my oldest says, it's okay, Dad. We love you. Will you just keep us posted? Let us know where you're at. And my ex-husband says, well, since we're talking about that, are you going to tell him or am I?
Oh, wow.
And then that's how my son found out.
Christine.
In that moment, actually, that's how my son and my daughter found out in that moment. And I swore up and down he'd never hurt them like that. But it wasn't about hurting them, it was about hurting me. And that was the one thing he had.
Yeah.
I will never question the lengths that he will go to for anything at this point. I don't know him. I didn't know him then. I don't know him now. I will never forgive that moment. And I'm at peace with that. There's no forgiveness deserved of that.
Right.
I just, so I immediately step in and do what I do after he says this. In that moment, I'm just like, all you're trying to do is save the kids and not smooth things over, I guess. And I said to the kids, I said to my son, I said, Dad was here from the start. He loves you. He wanted to be a part of your life from the beginning. I'm like saying stuff as fast as I can to try to recover this. And you can't take that back. And even in that final moment, I was still there protecting him. I was trying to protect my kids and I couldn't do it.
I'm so sorry. It must have been so incredibly difficult. And it just shows you the length, like you say, that he was prepared to go to
Yep.
keep the control.
And I'm confident that the entire time I was gone for that hour and a half, that's what he was planning to do.
Sure. Yeah. It was very
He was waiting for the
premeditated.
opening.
And I know one of the things you said to me when we first met was the implication in lots of these circumstances is that once it's over, it's over. You leave and it's done, and it's just not, is it?
Yeah, it's not at all. It doesn't end. Not only do you have to work through the stuff with the kids, right? Because we went through a period where it was like you kicked dad out because that's the narrative they were getting on the other side for the little tiny bit of contact they were getting. And they didn't see everything. They didn't have an understanding of how bad some of those moments got. And I mean, I didn't know until I was 4. I still have trouble comprehending some of the stuff that happened, right? Even at 40, and I lived it. And so they were a lot of times bystanders in it, but they're also in their teens, right? They don't want them to understand it. Please. I want to teach you how to identify it, but I don't want you to have to understand it ever. But it doesn't end. I just shared that I'm like working through this. I thought our parenting plan was perfect, and it's not. There's a flaw in it because it says I will not interfere, but it doesn't say you can't have contact. And now we're kind of at this point where it's like we might need to not have contact. And luckily the kids are, well, my one is an adult now, so he's almost 19, but my younger one is not. She's almost 16. So, we're working through right now, like how do I navigate this? She is making choices and I am supporting those wholeheartedly. But anytime he doesn't like something I say, anytime I set a boundary, he does his best to violate it 100 different ways. And when that doesn't work, because I don't react, the immediate trigger is involving the kids. And not even to them directly. It's just a threat to have time with the kids or to visit the kids and my son has a relationship with him today. They see each other every few weeks for lunch or something, but my daughter does not want that same thing. And so I'm trying to support both of those, whichever relationship they want. And that might change. I mean, they might flip flop and he might not and she does, and that's okay. But in an effort, she's under 18 and doesn't want a relationship, and I need to work through that. Yeah, it just doesn't end.
They become pawns in the game, don't they?
They do. And that's the easiest way for them, for the abuser to get to the other parent, is to leverage the kids.
Yeah. Because again, you've taken all the rest of his power away, everything that feeds it. And so that's all he's got left.
All he has left.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you went through energy healing before moving into talk therapy.
Man.
Because you could process without having to talk. What was that transition like, and what did that look like for you? How did that eventually lead you to being able to talk about it more openly?
I think coming out of the marriage, I still had this fear of if I talked about it, it might be real, one, but also if I talked about it, there might be consequences. And I mean, don't get me wrong, there are, but when I first left, again, the lawyer and the therapist are the only two people who have any inkling that there was any kind of abuse there, but they had the volume and like the extent was not clear to them because I didn't walk away trusting anybody because I didn't want any of it to come up in a situation that would have caused me or the kids any kind of harm. So I didn't talk about it, but it was clear that I was committed to like this not being him not controlling my life forever. And so coming out, especially for the 3 years leading up to the divorce, I had spent a lot of time by myself. I'd walk in the mornings before dawn and I'd spend 3 or 4 hours just mile after mile after mile, just processing some of the things, but still not speaking them right. But as I spent more time with myself, I came back to myself a little. Like I could feel the strength kind of building and leaving right after my divorce or after filing, sorry. A girlfriend had given me a Reiki energy healing session and it was like a combined massage and energy healing thing. So it was super low pressure. I didn't go in with any kind of expectations. I didn't have a clue what it was about. And in that first session, I remember it was a massage and then here I am sobbing and I don't know why. And you go through the motions and you start to process. And I found it super therapeutic to be in that room and be able to do that. She the therapist didn't ask any question. She didn't try to guide, sway, like anything. It was just, she was there to do the massage and the energy work, but it was pretty like nonverbal. So it became a really, really safe room for me because I could just do the processing and I started putting that like on a quarterly schedule and I maintained that throughout. And after about 2 sessions, I got to the point where I was like I might be able to start talking about this a little bit. And I, again, still not really trusting people. I don't know if they're going to believe me. And that was my biggest fear at that point was I say these things out. I finally had the courage to say this out loud and then people don't believe me. And I would sprinkle little things in with my parents to see how they'd react and with my closest friends. And what I found along the way was there was nobody who questioned any of it. They were like, oh, now it was like the final puzzle piece had locked in. They were like, now so many things make sense. And that was validating. It really was. And the more nuggets I threw out there and the more validation I got, the more I was like, okay, open up a little bit more and a little bit more. And I started testing it with other people. I had a colleague I had met for lunch one day and we had started talking about it and come to find out she had almost an identical story. And the thing that she said to me was that she had this level of shame associated with her story and she didn't want to talk about it because people would perceive her differently because she was one person by day at work and a different person by night, right? And there was just shame and embarrassment of getting yourself into this situation and then staying for as long as you do. And the more people I talked to, the more people had stories and everybody had that same shame and embarrassment. And I don't care what anybody says. We can say it's not our fault. I attracted him. And something in me attracted him. And I can tell you now what it was, right? It was the need to help and it was the need to please. And it was not understanding what love was. There were things. And that is my ownership in all of this. What he did from that point forward, though, is on him. His behavior, the way he acted, the way he talked, all of those things are not mine to carry. And the more I thought about that, the more I was like, oh, what if I could do something? What if I could do something for other people? Because I felt so alone during that 17 years and thought I was the only one and nobody would believe me. And here I am talking to all these people left and right that have stories and they believe me and I believe them because we all have the same story. And it just was super bizarre. And months before that, I had started writing a little bit in a journal for my kid because I didn't want them to look back when they started going through therapy like years later and think, was it really that bad? Did that really happen? Is that how I remember it? Because I knew if I wasn't here to validate, there was not validation coming from the other side, right? Because there's a complete denial over there. So I started writing out some of the bigger moments because I wanted them to know that is what happened and that is how it was and it was that bad. And so when these two things merged, this whole realization that it would be awesome for me to be able to help validate other people. I was like, well, maybe I can take that journal a step further. And that's what started the book. and building out that journey.
Yeah. Because the abuser's counting on you feeling so isolated and terrified and shameful, actually,
Yes.
hence you becoming the abuser, that you won't speak out. That's the point of keeping you in fear, right? That's the whole point.
It absolutely is.
And I can imagine how hearing other people's stories validated your own experience and gave you the courage to speak.
Yeah, it really did.
Yeah. So if someone was to be listening to this and was asking themselves, was it really bad? Was it really that bad? Was it me? What would you say? How would you help them to come to terms with that?
I would say if you're asking that question, if you're really, I mean, if you're sitting there thinking, was it that bad? Is it that bad? The answer is yes. Or you wouldn't be asking the question, right? Something in your body, something in your mind is telling you, your heart is telling you, this isn't true. And if that's not enough validation, if you're not ready to tell yourself confidently it is that bad, start paying attention to the signals. Start truly listening to your body. When he walks in the door, what happens to your body? Your shoulders go tense. Does your heart rate increase? When he raises his voice, what happens? Your hands start shaking. Does your whole body start shaking? Do you shut down completely? Like your mental or your cognitive state just shuts down? Start paying attention to what happens when you interact, not even just with your abuser, but people around you. Because you'll start to realize that if you do listen to your body's telling you. You're getting all the signs you need.
Yeah. And I
And
know
you can't make those up.
No. And I know you donate a book to a domestic violence organisation for every 20 books that are sold, don't you? And
Yes.
you double that during Domestic Violence Awareness Month in October. So what led you to build that into how you work? Was there a specific moment where that kind of started to happen?
I kept thinking as I was writing, the book has a fee, right? So, but a lot of people in this situation don't always have the money because they aren't always in control of the money, right? And oftentimes are not. And so I wanted to make sure it was accessible to everyone. And that was my way of being able to do that, was putting it in front of DV shelters. And I'm hoping I'll have it in libraries as early as October as well. Right now it's just on Amazon, but yeah, that was the premise behind it. I want to make sure it was accessible to everybody.
Yeah. And so they can get it. They can get it on Amazon at the moment.
Yes. Yeah.
But hopefully eventually it'll be available wide.
Yeah.
Yes. So, and I know the other thing that you mentioned to me was that on lots of the podcasts you've been on, a lot of them are men.
Yeah.
And a lot of them have shared their own experiences actually of being abused and how differently shame shows up for them. So I did just want to mention that because
Yeah.
so tell me what you've learned from those conversations that you've had with those men.
I think the biggest realization for me is that there were so many. I have yet to, I think, interact with a man on a podcast that didn't have a story. It might not be the exact same one. It might be essay. It might be something from our childhood. It was some form of abuse, right? And maybe we're all just drawn to each other in this community, but the sheer volume of men impacted is a little alarming because when you look at the statistics, it's a super small number. It's not super small, but it's like 1 in 6, right? But that's 1 in 6 that report. What about all the men who don't? Because from every man I talked to, every single one had the same story. We carry this level of shame because we feel like it was on us. Their level of shame on top of that is, well, I'm 6 foot tall, 250 pounds. Nobody's going to believe my wife's abusing me. And so it's the same narrative. It's on the other side, but it's another level of shame. And I think I didn't realize how broad that was and how almost universal that abuse is.
And I think it's really important, isn't it? I mean, obviously, speaking as women, we're speaking from experiences. I have lots of friends, sadly, who I've supported through similar situations and can recognize traits of lots of things that you talk about in people that I know. And sadly, it is a really common story. And as a mum of boys, I'm really aware of it, really aware.
Yeah.
And I hate the idea that my children would grow up to behave like that with a woman. I don't think for a second that either of them would. But I'm sure no mother ever thinks their son would behave that way, right? But yeah, it's so important. And equally, as a mother of boys, I don't want them going into a relationship with a woman that's going to behave like that with them
Right.
either. And I don't know how we protect them other than to talk about it as much as possible.
Yes. Yeah, these platforms, that is the one advantage we have over the younger versions of us, is there is so much more accessibility to information, into little stories like this where you can be like, oh, that it is what I'm experiencing. It does have a name, because once you can name it, a lot of times you're like, you feel that empowerment to be like, oh, this is a thing. And now I can work to fix the thing, and not in the fixer sense, in the healing sense.
Yeah.
Because as we start to resolve those wounds, you get stronger. You look for different things. You get healthier all the way around.
Yeah. And I think I said to you the first time we met, when I was 19 or 20, as my eldest son is now, I don't think I knew what narcissism was. I don't think I knew what
No.
gaslighting was. In fact, I don't think those
I
words,
don't even know if I know
that
those
word-
words.
but I don't think that word existed
Right.
then. And so my children definitely know what those words are, because
Yes.
obviously it's all over social media and TikTok and and they actually do talk about this behavior, and they call it out when they see it. And thank goodness that they are so much more self-aware than we were, just because of the sheer volume of information that's around them, which
Yes.
can only be a good thing, I guess,
Agreed.
in most instances.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes they know a little bit too much for their own good.
They're so much smarter than we
And
were.
use it against you at every available opportunity.
Yeah.
But I know, just to go back to the book, you write about your next relationship, and after everything you've learned about yourself, what was different about approaching a relationship with that self-awareness. So what does it look like to you now, finding a new relationship? What are your non-negotiables? I guess you would approach it in a totally different way now, right?
Yeah. I would love to say I walked into the relationship with some non-negotiables. I did, but they weren't the right ones. I went in with this mentality of I want the exact opposite of my ex. Everything from physical characteristics to career choice, all these things. And then as I started working through deeper healing, because of course there's a lot you can work through on your own, but then there's all these things that you can't work through until they show up in another relationship, because you have to be exposed to it to know it's a thing. And the one thing that is non-negotiable for me is someone who's willing to grow with me, who's willing to reflect on them and their experiences, me and my experiences, and grow with me, where we're both working through the healing. There's not a, I'm moving forward, you're not moving with me, because that'll end real quick. Someone who communicates. It doesn't have to be perfect. The healing doesn't have to be perfect. You can start and stop this. If you need to go work on yourself for a few weeks, please go do that. Like, we don't have to be in the middle of this together. We can go do our things and come back. And I think that has probably been maybe one of the healthiest adjustments to get out of my anxious attachment style, but to also help him overcome his avoidant style. But the commitment to just growing together and looking deeper than an argument about finances or an argument about how you talk to me. Like, why? Get real curious. That is my number one thing. Get curious. Don't assume that we know why they did what they did, or I did what I did, or I have any understanding of their past. Even if I've heard the story, I still sometimes don't know the dynamics. So instead of being reactive, the one biggest piece of advice I have is get curious. Ask them why, ask them how, ask them what they're feeling in that moment, versus assuming that we know, because what you uncover is super interesting, and it will bring you closer.
Yeah, for sure. So if someone is listening to this who's still in a relationship like you were for that 17 years, what would you want them to know?
I'd want them to know they're not alone. The community of survivors that is out there on, like, all over the globe, on social media, on all of these platforms, is astounding. You might not be ready to go to a shelter or, call the domestic violence hotline because you don't trust yet. But what you can do is you can join these private communities, and you can start to see what other people are doing. You can start to hear your story in other voices. You'll feel a lot less alone, and you'll see what people are doing that's working and what's not. it'll give you a chance to kind of study and reflect. So just know that there is a whole crazy supportive community out there. I've never seen anything like it. And it's the one thing I wish I would have done or known sooner. But again, I wasn't really ready to say it was abuse when I first left, even. So it took time. So if you're in that boat where you're like, is this abuse? First of all, it is. You wouldn't be asking it. Second, ease yourself into some of these community groups. You'll realize a lot faster than I did what you're experiencing, and you'll get names for it, and you'll feel empowered to start making small changes.
And start, and to know that it's not going to be an overnight fix necessarily, but you can start to, like you say, make small changes or put small things in place to help you feel like you're making a step towards changing things. And it might take 3.5 years, but if it takes that long, it takes that long,
Yes, it does. And I'll just share this because it's a thing that I've reflected on throughout my process. The big thing for me was the kids' ages. The second biggest thing was the income and the keeping the home that the kids grew up in for them. That's my number one regret is I couldn't move beyond their ages. They were what they were. But the house, they don't care about the house. House and home are different. The structure, they don't care about. Home is where the safe parent is. And they will tell you that. They might tell you, it might be a rough 6 months, right? As you adjust and you transition. But they know what home is. And they would rather, and you would rather, they be safe and in that home with a safe parent than the reverse.
And actually, kids are probably more adaptable than we give them credit for. Right?
Oh, they are. Totally.
Yeah. So thank you so much for this conversation. It's been, like I said to you, I recognize so much in everything that you've said. And I think you're doing amazing work in raising awareness. So if people want to find you or find your book and find out more about the work that you're doing, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Thank you so much. It is at The Truth She Showed Me on Facebook, Instagram, and then TikTok. And then the book is available on Amazon today.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And obviously, I'll make sure all of the links are all in the show notes.
Yes.
And we'll make sure that there's support links there for anybody that's been affected by anything that we've talked about in this conversation. So it just leaves me to thank you so much for your time and energy and your honesty, obviously. And because your book is about truth, and that's what I'm all about. So
thank you so much for sharing your audience and your platform and helping get the word out.
Of course.